Good morning. This is Sunday, August 29th. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. I call it the unbiased word. I started using that a lot because when we go through the scriptures, we try to look at just the scriptures without the influence of stories we may have heard, movies we may have seen about the pearly gates or Sunday school lessons or Broadway musicals or whatever that all contain their own ideas about the Bible. Some of us, we've watched the movie The Ten Commandments, and we were assuming that that's exactly the way things happened because the movie was so good. Yet you read the Bible, and you go, oh, well, that's not how that happened. That's not. And so there are things that color and affect our reading of the Bible. So I really just try to look at the text. What did God say? And I believe God is telling us one story from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation. There's one real writer of the Bible, that's God, and there's one thing that he's pointing to, which is our salvation, and that every story, every book of the Bible is actually connected. They're not a series of books written by different people. Even though God used different people, he was the writer. And you can see the connection as you go through from Genesis to Revelation in every chapter in every book. You can see the story being borne out. And when we just look at just the text, it really helps our understanding of what the Bible says. So right now, we're in Genesis chapter, we were just finishing Genesis chapter 38. Last week, we were talking about uh, Tamar and Judah. I kept saying Joshua, and I meant to say Judah the whole time. This is the story of Judah, who was the fourth born son of Jacob, and Joseph, who was the 11th, 4 and 11, right? The 11th born son of Jacob. The last 12 chapters of Genesis are about Judah and Joseph. Now we think they're just about Joseph, but really it's more about Judah than Joseph, and the transformation that he went through, and we will see why God selected Judah and not Joseph to carry the line of the Messiah. What was there about Judah that God decided the Messiah is going to come through him? Okay, so in Matthew chapter 30, not Matthew, in Genesis chapter 38, and again I kept saying Joshua, I meant to say Judah. Um, we read about Tamar and how uh, Judah. Now, and this chapter takes 22 years to happen because it's 22 years before the brothers see Joseph again. He left them at 17. Joseph was sold off to slavery at 17, and he appeared before Pharaoh at the age of 30, so that's 13 years before he appeared before Pharaoh. Then, while he was working for Pharaoh, there was 7 years of abundance. So that's now 7 and 13. It's 20. And then there were 2 years of famine. So that's 22 years. And that's when the brothers showed up in the second year of the famine. So it's been 22 years since they seen him. They did not recognize him. And if you've gone to a high school reunion, if it's been 22 years since you've seen some people, sometimes they look just the same. You go, wow. And other times you go, who is that? Oh my God, is that so? They look so different. Now they got a beard and no hair. Or I'm talking about the women. No, I'm kidding. So, uh, so he looked very different. They didn't recognize him. Now, before they get to him, 22 years later, there's this chapter, chapter 38, about Judah, not Joshua, Judah and Tamar. I'm just reminding us that Judah went off and defied his parents and married a Canaanite woman. They don't even tell you what her name is. She's the daughter of Shua. So I guess he was important, but her name was not important. They had 3 kids in succession. Boom, 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 right? When the first kid turned to 18, Judah, not Joshua, Judah found a wife from him named Tamar. But he was so wicked, and the Bible doesn't even say what he did, but he was so wicked, which is not a shock, because this is why God was trying to keep Jacob's children, or Israel's children, his name is Israel, from the Canaanites, because they're descendants of the Tower of Babel people, the Canaanites. They really are godless. The Sodom and Gomorrah, they were Canaanites, right? So it's like, don't mix with them because you're going to pick up their habits and then I will have to kill you. So he's trying to keep them separate because he's trying to uh, produce this line that's going to present the Messiah. And if they pick up their wicked habits, God's going to have to judge them too. But Judah went, married this Canaanite woman. Canaanite woman brought up her son in Canaanite ways. That's a new thing now. You got Canaanite ways. And um, he was wicked. And it says he was so wicked, God had to kill him. It's like, wow. But we discussed how God is always holding back judgment anyway. And then finally, he just, okay, I'm gonna let you have what you've been asking for. And it's like you're trying to hold back somebody from reaching for the fire, and you're trying to tell them the fire's gonna burn you, don't, and you're holding their hand, and so, okay, fine, learn your lesson yourself. Go ahead and get burned in the fire, and then you realize, oh, I should have listened. So God releases judgment, and the first son is killed. He dies. So as the tradition is, she had to marry the second son because the first son didn't have any heirs, and that heir that she used to have with the second son, that firstborn, would technically belong to the dead brother to carry on his line. Well, his second brother hated him so much, and he wanted all the family fortune, so he refused to lay with Tamar because he didn't want his brother to have any heirs, and so God had to wipe him out too. So we get to the third brother. So he was 18 now, 19 years have gone by. We're at the third brother, 20 years have gone by because now he's about to turn 18. And Judah says, as soon as he's 18, he didn't say those exact words, but as soon as he's of age, uh, you can, I'll have him marry you. But a year has gone by, nothing. I mean, he turned 18, and then another year went by, and because Judah forgot about it, because Judah's problem again was not caring about other people's emotions. We hear him later say that we heard our brothers cry, we heard his anguish when we threw him in the well, and we ignored it. And that's who Judah is. At least that's who he was. God had to transform him. Because a lot of times our worst qualities are really, God put them there so they could be our best qualities, right? You talk too much. That's a horrible quality. Well, no, God gave him that gift of talking. He just wants to take it and refine it. You know too much about everybody's business. Well, no, God gave them that person that gift of knowing what everybody's doing because he's going to make him a supervisor. So a lot of times our worst qualities are really, God intended them to be our best qualities. He just wants to take that quality and use it. So Judah understood people's compassion. He just refused to act on it, right? He's aware, very aware of what people are going through, but just ignored it. So Tamar's waiting. She's a pariah. She can't marry anybody else because she's married two husbands and they both died. So she's just going to die childless, and unless he remembers his promise. So she tricked him. Remember, she dressed up like a harlot when she heard that he was on his way to this sheep shearing festival. Because when they would shear the sheep, they'd say, "Ah, it's time to have a party." And Judah went into her thinking, "Oh, look, there's a harlot. How nice." He had it advertised right there. That made it so easy for me. Gets her pregnant, but she says, for payment, I want a goat. Well, I don't have a goat. Well, okay, then give me your ring and your credit card and your phone. So gives it three important things. And once you give me that goat, then I'll give him back to you. He doesn't know it's Tamar. Sure enough, later, he finds out, oh, your daughter-in-law's pregnant. What? She's pregnant? How horrible. Let's bring her to be burned. And of course, it's his kid, and he doesn't know that. So he brings her in, and she says, if you want to know who did this to me, and a lot of times, now, I understand people being like, why are always punishing the woman and not the man? And that's because unless you catch them in the act, which in the New Testament, they had caught that woman in adultery in the act. So if you catch them in the act, then clearly you can see that it's who it is. But if you simply discover someone's pregnant, they were afraid that she could point to anybody. He did it, he did it, he did it. So unless you caught the man in the act, They only punished the woman. So they were ready to punish her because she's pregnant. Nobody caught them in the act. And she says, "Oh, I've got proof of who it is." "Well, show me who this person is." And then he realizes that's his credit card, that's his phone. And so uh, he's like, "Wow." And basically he realizes, I've been waiting, that this woman was desperate, that I'd ignored her pain. She's supposed to have been married to my third son, and I had ignored that. And I have a feeling that the son went ahead and just married somebody else. And uh, but she went ahead and had, now he didn't lie with her again, but she went ahead and had two kids, right? She had twins. And I actually want to start there. That's at the end of the chapter, because there's something pretty interesting that I don't want to. I went too fast last week and I kind of skipped over it. Um, so starting in Genesis 38, and then we're going to go to Genesis 39. But starting in Genesis 38, verse 24, it says, "And it came to pass about 3 months after that," so she was 6 months pregnant, "that Judah was to, oh, I'm sorry, she's now 3 months pregnant. So it came to pass that 3 months after that affair with Judah, that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, Bring her out and let her be burned." And I'm saying this is similar to what happened with David when Nathan came to him, and somebody has done a horrible thing to a man and taken his only sheep. And the person who took it, they have a whole bunch of sheep, but he took his own. How horrible that you would take a man's only sheep. Whoever it is, he must be punished. And Nathan said, "It's you. It's you. You went and took. You have 10 wives, and you took his one wife and had him killed." And David realized, "Oh wow, I'm a bad person." So that's exactly what happened to Judah. He said, "Oh, I'm a bad person," and he repented. Now he didn't have to repent. What's interesting is he's the first of the brothers to repent that is recorded. Reuben slept with his father's wife. It's not recorded that he ever came and said, "Ooh, I'm so sorry." Reuben and Simeon, brothers 2 and 3, had all those people killed because they had raped their sister. Their anger is understandable, but how they responded to it is not understandable. You can't go around and killing everybody because you're mad. There's no recording of them repent. In fact, they said, "Well, what? We're supposed to let him just lie with our sister and make her a fool." No repentance. Judah did repent. So in verse 25, it says, "When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, Please determine whose these are, the signet and this cord and the staff," these three important things. And so Judah acknowledged them and said, "Wow, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah, my son, and never knew her again." So he actually realized his action. This is what's different about Judah and the first three brothers, because he's Judah's brother number 4. He actually went, "Wow, I messed up." Okay. "Now it came to pass at the time of giving birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that one put out his hand," right? The first twin put his little hand out, "and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, This one came out first." And then it happened, though, he drew back his hand, and that the brother actually is born first. So a hand doesn't mean you're born. Your whole body has to come out, and unexpectedly. And she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." And breach means a breakthrough, you know. Therefore, his name is called Perez, which means breakthrough, right? You push through. Now, I have to discuss Perez and his brother Zerah, because it's very interesting. Because these are Judah's first kids, and Judah's the line that the Messiah is going to come from. So who these kids are is very important. In Micah chapter 2, verse 12 through 13, and this is always a guess, of the 12 sons of Jacob. People were never sure who the Messiah was going to come through. Everyone knew that God had told Abraham, "Through your seed." So now you've got 12 sons. And there was always this debate, and God was always explaining who, in various ways. When Jacob was on his deathbed, he said, "Shiloh will come through you." And they went, "I don't know what that means." "Yeah, you do." So God was always pointing toward the line of Judah, so that they would know this, look at this line, that's where the Messiah is going to come from. So in Micah chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, here's another prophecy about the Messiah. It says, I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob, all of your kids that have gone off in the various direction. I'm going to assemble you back together. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep of the fold, like a flock in the midst of their pasture. So this is after they've been scattered. Micah is prophesying at a time when there were 12 tribes, right? And they each had a place in Israel. And then they'd been taken off into bondage because of disobedience. But only Judah and Benjamin and a little bit of Simeon had come back. The other 10 tribes, or 9.5 tribes, had been scattered. And he says, I'm going to bring you back together like a flock in the midst of their pasture. They shall make a loud noise because of so many people. Like, you'll be so excited. They'll make a loud noise. And I believe this happened on the day of Pentecost, when Jews came from all over the world, and it lists that they'd gone to Africa and Europe and all these different places and parts of the Middle East, and from all over the world, Jews came on the day of Pentecost, and they made this loud noise. Okay. The one who breaks open will come before them. The one who breaks through will come before them. And he's giving a hint because Perez, Judah's first son, was named Breakthrough. He says the one who breaks through will come before them, and they will break out. And again, it's the same word that they say, they'll break. So he's saying the one who is Perez will come before them, and they will Perez. They will break out. And then they will pass through the gate and go out by it. So how they've been gathered like sheep in the farm, they'll break through and they'll go out of that gate and spread the gospel all over the world. It says, their king will pass before them with the Lord at their head. So they'll break through. And this, again, it's not by coincidence that Perez was named Breakthrough, break out. And God's giving another hint that that's the king. If you're looking for where the king's going to come through from, so that's just a subtle hint. But here's what's very interesting. Now, in Ruth chapter 4, it says, now this is the genealogy of Perez, Judah's first son. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Abinadab, and Aminadab begot Nahshon. So that's 4 generations. And those are the 4 generations that were in Egypt. When Judah took his twin sons, Perez and Zerah, to Egypt, and they moved to Egypt, there were 4 generations that were there, right? Perez begot Hezron, Ram begot Abinadab, and Abinadab begot Nahshon. So, in the book of Numbers, when they're coming out of Egypt, it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. This is Numbers chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. It says, and the Lord spake to Moses and Aaron, saying, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of his father's house. Because there's 1 million people coming out of Egypt, and he wants them in groups. Camp according to your family name, whichever brother you're from. This is 400 years later, 4 generations later. So whether you're Reuben's people, all Reuben's people camp, all Judah's people camp, all Joseph's people camp, right? Camp by your own. And they had a flag and everything. It's cool. Beside the emblems of the father's house, and they shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. Don't crowd the tabernacle. On the east side, toward the rising of the sun, those are the standard of the forces with Judah shall camp according to their armies. And Nahshon, the son of Aminadab, shall be the leader of the children of Judah. Now, Nahshon came from Perez. But Judah had twin sons. What about Zerah? Zerah, his kids are secondary for some reason. Nahshon, that line, they get to lead all of the house of Judah, right? It says, and the army was numbered at 74,600. So that's how many people from Judah's line, including Zerah's kid and Perez's kid, right? Both twin sons, altogether they're 74,000. But Nahshon, he got to be the head of everybody. Okay, in Ruth chapter 4, verse 19, it says, Nahshon begat Salmon. Okay, so they're coming out of Egypt. Nahshon is the leader. His son is Salmon. And that's significant. Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 and 2 says, Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from Acacia Grove to spy secretly. So Nishan led them out of Egypt, and then 40 years later, his son, Salmon, is one of the leaders now, as they're about to go into the promised land. There was just 40 years while they were just wandering around the wilderness. And so Nishan's generation was dying out, and now Salmon, he's ready to go 40 years later, lead them into the wilderness, into the promised land. Joshua had to choose 2 spies. Now, this is not in the Bible. This is my conjecture, what I'm about to say. Joshua sent out 2 spies. If you remember 40 years earlier, Moses sent out 12 spies. He sent out 1 from each tribe. Sent out 12 spies. 10 of them came back with a bad report. We can't do it. We're not going to be able to go into the promised land. But 2, Joshua and Caleb, came back with a good report. They're like, yeah, we can do this, right? Joshua is direct descendant from Joseph's tribe, and Caleb is direct descendant from Judah's tribe. So Joseph and Judah, their kids of the 12 sons, their kids, they were the bold ones who went out at the time when nation was, the leader and all that. And they went out and they came back with a good report. So now it's Joshua's turn to send out 2 spies. And I just believe, this is just conjecture, that if he's going to send out 2 spies, he probably sent out 1 from Joseph's tribe and 1 from Judah's tribe again, because the other 10 people of the 10 tribes had shown themselves to be very scared. And this is consistent with the whole book of Joshua. Judah's tribe is always doing stuff, and Joseph's tribe, which is represented by Ephraim, his son, they're always leading the way and going out, and the other 10 tribes are always hesitant to ever do anything. So I just believe that he probably sent out 1 from Judah and 1 from Joseph. So Salmon, Nahshon's son, he represents Judah, and somebody from Joseph's tribe probably went out because he sent out 2 spies. So that's just my guess. But anyway, so he sent out 2 spies, 2 men from Acacia Grove to spy secretly. So we're back in Joshua chapter 2 saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and they came to the house of a harlot named Rahab, and they lodged there. So you got these 2 spies. I believe one of them is Salmon, right? A direct descendant of Perez, all the way down. And that Salmon's one of these 2 spies who's living with Rahab. They spend the night there. Then word gets out the next day. We think some men snuck in and we never saw them leave. And they discuss with Rahab what we're going to, and she says, oh, I'm so glad you're here because we'd heard things about you. And they spend the day together in very desperate situations because they're going to be exposed any minute. And she hid them under her bed and blah, blah, blah. So in my mind, but it doesn't say this in the Bible, that's when Salmon and Rahab fell in love. Now, we know that Salmon did marry Rahab. So I'm not making up that they got together. I'm just thinking that might have been when they met, when he snuck into her house, right? And she hid him there. In Ruth chapter 4, verse 18, it says Salmon begot Boaz, and through Rahab. And Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. So now you got David all the way from Perez through Nahshon, right, through Salmon, all the way to David. So that's the line of Judah that Perez represents. But again, he had twin sons, right? And going back to Genesis 38, verse 30. So I'm just pinpointing some things in this chapter that sometimes we miss. He says, afterward, the brother came out who had the scarlet thread in his hands. Remember, there were twin sons. And his name was called Zerah. So we've got Perez's line of the twins, which leads directly to David. And from David comes Jesus. And Salmon, who I believe was the spy who married Rahab, and just, that whole line. What about Zerah's line that came out of Judah? Well, they're right there in the Bible. 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 6 and 7 says, the sons of Zerah were Zimri. Now, Zimri, another translation for Zimri is Zabdi. So he had Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara, 5 sons. So Zerah, the twin of Perez, had 5 sons. This is 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. And the son of Carmi was Akar. And we go, Carmi? Who's Carmi? Because it's really funny. He mentions Zerah's 5 sons and then suddenly skips to Carmi. It says, son of Carmi was Akar, the troubler of Israel, who transgressed in the accursed thing. Bum, bum, bum. So whoever Carmi was, his son was the one who, his name forever is the troubler of Israel, who transgressed in the accursed thing. So let's find out who Carmi is, because his son messed everything up. And again, this is all connected to the other twin son. So now the city, Joshua chapter 6, verse 18 through 20. I started 17. So Joshua chapter 6, verse 17. Talking about Jericho. And he has sent 2 spies in to talk to Rahab. Right? He says, now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction. Talking about Jericho. It and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. They had that night together and that day together, and she snuck them out through the window, right? She was so on their side. And in my mind, that's when she fell in love. Okay. Because we know eventually she married Salmon. So it says, and you, by all means, abstain from the accursed thing. So when you go into the city and it's all destroyed, abstain from the cursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things and make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron, they're consecrated to the Lord. So any of the silver and gold vessel, that's going to go into the treasury of the Lord. But anything else, all their astrology and all their everything else, it's accursed. Don't take it. It's all evil. Okay, but the silver, gold, vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come to the treasury of the Lord. Now, Joshua chapter 7. So they go in and they march around Jericho 7 times and the walls fall down and they go in and they have great victory. They don't touch anything that the Lord didn't tell them to touch, except for one person. And you want to say, why? So when God does such a great thing, this is always curious to us, and God does this great miracle, why do you fight against him when you know God says, no, don't do that? I understood, and God was not even mad if there hasn't been a prophecy for 400 years, like because Malachi in the book of the Old Testament, that last book of the Old Testament, there's a 400-year difference between Malachi and Matthew, the first book of the New Testament. So it's been 400 years. There have been no prophecies, no nothing. You can understand why those people might be not living up to God's standards. But if God is just part of the Red Sea, if God has just knocked down the walls of Jericho and done this miracles, and then God says, don't do this, something's got to be really deeply wrong with you to defy God at that point. So you wonder, why did Achan or Akar do this? Okay, this is all very fascinating to me. So it says, so Joshua chapter 7, it says, but the children of Israel, starting in verse 1, committed a trespass regarding the accursed things, for Achan or Akar, Achan, but earlier they spelled it Hchar, the son of Camri, the son of Zebdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Zubah. Oh, that's who Camri, that's who Achan is. He's from that other twin, right? The son of Zerah. So it was Zerah, then Zebdi or Zimri, then Carmi, then Achan. So you've got one twin son who produced the Messiah. From Perez came Salmon, who married Rahab the harlot and produced Jesse, whose son was David, the king, and all the way down to Jesus. The other twin son produced Achan, right, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, so the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel. They were judged. And let's just read how. And I'm going to tell you why Zerah's line did this thing. It was so defiant, and the other twin son, Jesus, came out of that line, and the other twin son produced the troubler of Israel, and one twin son produced the savior of Israel. Why? Okay, so they returned to Joshua in Joshua chapter 7, verse 3, when he sent out spies. After Jericho had fallen, they were going to go get a place called Ai. That's what it was called, Ai. So they were going to go, and they're going to be easy. I mean, Jericho is this walled city with thousands of people in it. I just didn't have it. It's like they're easy. They're next. So he sent out spies again and says they returned to Joshua and said to him, do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Because there's like 1 million of these Jews that came out, the children of Israel that came out, right? One army alone was 74,000. And there was another army, it was 85,000, over 100,000. Each of these tribes had so many people. So these Israelites, right? So many. He says, don't send them all up. You don't need to send out 900,000 people. He says, just about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not weary all the people there, for the people of Ai are few. Because Joshua said, because God gave us his victory over Jericho, and that was a walled city that had hundreds of thousands of people in it. They got it just a few hundred people. So we'll send about 2,000 people, we'll be done. Verse 6 says, then Joshua tore his clothes. Why? Because when he sent that 2,000 people, they were slaughtered. And he could not understand, how did 300 or 400 people slaughter 2,000 or 3,000 of our, we still outnumbered them. Why did God have us lose so horribly? So in verse 6, it says, Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until evening. So he got this news in the morning, and he's just on his face all day, on his face, in the dirt. And he and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads, and they just lay in the dirt. Now I love this, Joshua chapter 7, verse 8. He's praying, and he says, oh Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns its back before its enemies? Meaning when they start running, right? And they turn their back to their enemies because they're running. What are we going to say? He says, for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear it and surround us. Now, the opposite had happened in Jericho. When the spies got there, Rahab told the spies, we've heard all about you and how you defeated Pharaoh and the Red Sea opened, and we're all afraid of you. And that's why we're in this walled city and scared, because we're not going to open the gates because you're going to destroy us. So he's saying, well, the opposite is going to be true now. We got our butts beat by 300 guys. And so when we have to turn and run, it says, for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear it, and they'll surround us and cut off our name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name? Because you're trying to establish, again, this is why he chose Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, down to Judah, because he's trying to establish his name in the earth so that everybody else will be able to look at these people and go, okay, there is a God. I can see that if I trust in a God, and that this is what will happen with me, and he will bless me and prosper me. And so, and it's like you start summer school, and the reason you may have started summer school because you failed the class. Everybody's there in that summer school class because you failed. And so so you're starting off with an F, which is the opposite of if you're a smart teacher. In a new semester, everybody has an A. Everybody's got an A. You're not even starting at 0, you're starting at A, and then you take a test, another test, and your grade kind of lowers a little bit if you keep not passing tests. You're bringing your A down to a B, then you bring your A down to a C, right? But everybody's starting there. It's the opposite in summer school. Everyone failed that class. You're starting with a fail. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because we all start as humans with a fail. We're all sinners. And God's saying, hey, you're all starting with a fail. I'm trying to rescue you. That's what your summer school teacher is trying to rescue you from, that fail, to make sure you pass that class. So you might pick one student. Okay, I'm gonna make an example of you. I'm gonna bring you up, and you choose a student sometime to explain something and act something out and demonstrate, and so that the other people can see. And you pick the smart. Okay, I can see that one kid. He's on the ball. I don't know why he failed, but I can see that he's really paying attention. So let me use him to demonstrate these things to the class, and then they'll see this person get it, then they'll get it. And that's what God did with Abraham's line. Let me choose this particular people, and when the earth sees, when all the people of the earth sees how I bless them and what I'm doing with them and how I'm teaching them to follow my commandments, and they'll want to imitate that same thing. So Joshua is saying, hey, if they surround us and cut us off from the earth, then what will you do for your great name? You're trying to establish your name in the earth through us. So in verse 10, it says, so the Lord said to Joshua, now don't forget, Joshua is saying this into the dirt. He's lying on his face into the dirt, and he's put dust on his head, and he's been there all day long. So he's talking into the dirt. So verse 11, it says, get up, sanctify the people. No, I'm sorry, verse 10. So the Lord said to Joshua, get up. Why do you lie thus on your face? And that's hilarious to me, that God's like, why are you lying on your face? What? Verse Yes, talking into the ground and dust in your head, that's not going to move me. Let me tell you what the problem is, and we'll fix it. But you lying in dirt doesn't impress me at all. Okay, verse 13, he says, "Get up, sanctify the people, and say, sanctify yourselves for tomorrow, because thus says the Lord God of Israel." Right? So I'm going to do something tomorrow. There is an accursed thing in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the accursed thing from among you. And that's a truth that we have to carry around. Sometimes you have to get rid of the accursed thing. There's something in your midst. It could be a person, it could be a thing. And as long as you have that in your midst, it must be removed. You can't, God won't let you move forward because there's some poisonous thing, and he created our system to vomit up the poison, right? If you actually, if you read the instructions, it'll say induce vomiting if you swallow poison. You got to get that out of your system totally. You don't like make it blend in. You get poison all the way out because it will poison the rest. So he says you got to remove the accursed thing and basically the people who have that kind of attitude that even as I knock the walls down and they see a miracle, they've decided they got to have those things. Why? Why did the descendant of Zerah, who's the twin brother, Achan, say, "No, I've got to have that," even though God said, "No, I've got to have that"? Okay, so Joshua chapter 7, verse 16. So Joshua rose early in the morning and brought Israel by their tribes, and the tribe of Judah was taken. Um, here's the situation. They didn't have the Spirit of God in them. So God would always have to lead them from the outside and direct them from the outside. There'd be a pillar of fire that they would follow. Right now, the fire is in us that we follow God. Something in us will say, "Oh, you should call this person," or "You should turn left," or "Hey, why don't you buy one of those?" or "You better take an umbrella today." Something in it. That fire's in us now. But in their day, the fire was in the outside. They're being led by the outside. So when God was trying to tell him who did something wrong, the Urim and the Thummim would glow, or they would throw basically like dice, and God would point to this. So they're all 12 tribes are out, and he'd say, "Okay, Lord, which one is it?" And then the thing would glow, and they say, "Okay, it's the tribe of Judah. You're everybody else can leave." And then they count down, okay, because Judah now has a Judah had twin sons. Remember, one twin son had 5 kids, the other had 3 kids. So there's 8 of them, and then there's 16, and there's right. There's a bunch of them, and they're trying to settle who, and they're just eliminating down, right? And uh, it says, so Joshua rose early in the morning, Joshua 7:16, and brought Israel by their tribes, and the tribe of Judah was taken. And then he brought the clan of Judah, and he took the family of the Zarites. This is Zerah's kids. So you got Perez and Zerah, the twins. Okay. And he brought the family of the Zarites man by man. And Zebdi, which is Zimri, was taken. Then he brought his household by man. And Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zebdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, was taken. So now we know exactly which family. They just keep narrowing it down. And it's Achan's family, right? Joshua 7, chapter 24. Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, the son of Zerah, the silver, the garment, the wedge of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys and sheep, his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. Now, that's another name for Achan. And this became the name as the Valley of Trouble. And Achan's name began to mean trouble. And sometimes they would change the meaning of your name after you were born. They didn't know when you were born what to call you, but later after you were born, they said your name means trouble, or your name means deceiver, or your name. So they brought him to the Valley of Achor, which is now the Valley of Trouble, because they gathered it was him. And he had hidden the gold and the silver, even though it said that belongs to the Lord. Do not keep that. That belongs to the Lord. And the other things don't touch. He had all of that stuff with him and had buried it in his tent. And verse 25 of Joshua 7, and Joshua said, "Why have you troubled us? The Lord will trouble you this day." So all Israel stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. Because this is direct defiance in God's face, and that's always worse. When I was disciplining my students in class, and they'd get trouble. It was always the boys. The girls were always wonderful. The boys were always crazy. So I'd say, "Come up here," and why are you doing this? And you're acting crazy, and leave that girl alone. Stop hitting her, and stop throwing books out, whatever. And and I would tell them though, when you're in my face, just say yes, say okay. I said, you're free to turn around and you can curse under your breath and as you walk away. But in my face, if you act crazy in my face, then I'm going to double your punishment because you're doing it right in my face. So I said, be smart. Just smile and say, yes, sir, and okay. And then after class, talk about me. When you get home, oh, I hate that man. You know, I said, please be smart. But anything you do right in my face, I'm gonna have to kill you. So and I would tell, and I say, and this is the same thing with your parents, just say okay when your parents say something, just say okay, please. You can curse them later while you're sweeping the trash up, but just do what they said in their face. So they're asking Achan, why would you do this in God's face? He just said, don't do this. And Achan explains, but I saw this and I saw that and I wanted to have it. Why? His family line. So you got the twins that are born, Perez and Zerah, right? Judah has these twins from Tamar or Tamar, the harlot, as twins. Perez, the brother who broke out, he was called, you're the one who breaks out. Zerah was the brother who's going to rise at some point. That is what those two names mean. But Perez became the chosen family, and Zerah became the second place, and was named that, and his family's like, you don't get to have everything that Perez that line has. You're just the also rans. That's what they kind of named him. You know, your name means I'm trying to get there. I'm hoping to get there. And if you keep emphasizing to somebody you're not really good and you're not really making it, they're going to start to believe that. So his line is really jealous of the other twins line. They get to be the leaders, right? Nashon, his great grandson, he's the leader, and he shall lead us people, and it's like, well, we're the twin, and we're not getting nothing. And so when Achan sees all this stuff, he says, my family's going to get something. I deserve something, and so Achan takes all this stuff because he's been told his whole life, you don't get nothing. Now that's not true. That's not how God saw it, but that's what people were saying to that line. Perez is the strong one. He's the breakthrough. And you're the also rans. And so when you believe that so much, in fact, I call this the sin, not of Achan, but the sin of envy. That's the title of it, the sin of envy. Because when you sit and you envy somebody else and what they got and not recognize what God is doing for you and how God is blessing you, you can sit and start to covet their stuff and just not be aware of all the how you've been blessed. And that sometimes leads to some bad behaviors where people become selfish or greedy, or like Judah's son that said, no, I'm not going to have a child with Tamar and give it to my brother and have him get everything. I want it all. Boom, God knocked him down. And that's what God does, because he wants us to know we can give. We can share with other people. We don't have to be jealous because God will bless us. And that's an act of faith when you give. When you say, if you hold on to it, no, I got to keep it. I got to keep it. You're saying because God is stupid and God won't bless me. That's why when you're holding up on something and you won't give in the offering or give to your fellow man or give, that's because I don't trust God. God's not going to come through. That's what that attitude is. And he's like, no, you got to be someone who gives. And when you spend all your time being jealous of somebody else, you might end up stealing from them in some way, or hoarding stuff for yourself because you're so afraid you're not going to get anything. And that's where Achan comes from. He's not just some, like, why'd they do that? That's that twin son, that great grandson right down the line, who they felt slighted, and it was emphasized to them, not by God, by the people around them. You know, you don't try as hard. You're just not as good. And we have to be careful what we're saying to people, because they may not be like their brother, but they have their own talent. They may not be like their sister, but they have their own thing that we've got to emphasize instead of constantly telling people what they don't have. Let's just constantly tell people how they have been blessed by God and what they do have, so that there's no envy. So that's where this sin comes from. So they had to burn them and they stoned them. Now they burned them and they stoned them. This is fantastic. So Israel stoned them with stones and then burned them with fire after they had stoned them. So they're dead, and then we want them all the way gone. You got to be, so you're dead, and now we're going to burn your bodies. But we got to get out that poison. We got to get out that attitude that says, I don't have to listen to God. I'm going to do my own thing. That's got to be removed from the camp. So they raised over him a great heap of stones, still there to this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger, and therefore the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor, or the Valley of Achin, to this day. It means the Valley of Trouble. So uh, uh, that's, I just wanted to go over that because it's interesting how these stories are connected. And when you read the Bible and you're reading Joshua and you go, who's Achan? It's, if you know the whole history, the Bible's fascinating to me. If you know the whole history and what everything means. Now I'm going on to Genesis 39. Okay, so now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. So we know what was going on. Well, you know what? I guess I have to stop. So I will get to this next week. But Joseph, let me just say this, that Joseph went down to Egypt, and now we're going to see what goes on with him for those 22 years. So we see what's going on with Judah for 22 years, and how his kids, and how Judah was the first son to repent and recognize that he was not righteous, and that he was not doing with what God wanted to do, and that began the softening of Judah's heart. Well, now we're going to see the softening of Joseph's heart, because Joseph, his problem was he thought everything was about him, was not his fault. His father told him that his whole life, it's all about you. And so let me tell you my dream. He never says, hey, brothers, let me hear your dreams. He didn't even think they had dreams. He just assumed that all their dreams were his dreams. You're going to love my dream, and whatever your dreams have, they're not important. But it was the asking about dreams that ultimately saves Joseph. When he finally shuts his own mouth and he's in prison, and he says to the butler and the baker, hey, tell me about your dreams. And they begin to tell him. And so he goes through a transformation where he thinks the world revolves around him, to where now he understands that God actually is blessing everybody. It's not all about him. And that leads him out of prison and sets him before Pharaoh. And Joseph's gift, which I was saying earlier, that everybody has a gift, but when the devil has it, or when the world has it, it's bad. But when God takes it, then we see what that gift really is. Oh, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. You know, like I was saying, the fact that you talk so much, you just talk too much. Oh no, you're supposed to be a speaker. That's why you talk so much. That's your gift. Well, you're always doing that. No, that's your gift. You always got your nose in those books, or you're playing video games all the time. Oh no, that's your gift. Now that God has got a hold of it and cleaned all the world off of it, now we can see what that gift is, and we'll see what Joseph's gift is, and how God finally used it in the correct way once Joseph surrendered it to him. So thank you. We'll start with Genesis chapter 39 to next Sunday. And on Wednesday, we are completing Matthew chapter 27 on the crucifixion of Christ. And so thank you for listening in. And I will, save. So I will talk to you soon in video.